What is diversity? What is diversity? What is diversity? What is diversity? What is spirituality? Spirituality. Spirituality. How do they diverge? How do they diverge? How do they convert? How do they convert? How do they convert? How are we different? How are we different? How are we different? How are we the same? How are we the same? How are we the same? What is diversity? What is diversity? What is spirituality? Spirituality. This is Angelo John Lewis for the Diversity and Spirituality Network podcast. In case you're not familiar with us, the Diversity and Spirituality Network is an emerging community of people that are actively exploring the integration of diversity and spirituality. If you'd like to know more about us, please visit our website, diversityandspirituality.com. And if you like the podcast, I invite you to rate the podcast on iTunes or wherever you get podcasts, which goes a long way to helping us spread the word and to share our message of sacred inclusion. Today, it's my privilege to interview Jules Munns.
It's funny to use the word privilege in a conversation about diversity.
I don't think of it as a bad word, you know.
It's not a bad word unless it's misused.
That's right. Yeah, right. And you can do lots of things, especially if you're unconscious of your privilege. Anyway, as I started to say before Jules cut me off.
I'm sorry.
That's all right. Jules is one of the UK's most prolific improvisation teachers and actors. He's the artistic director of the Nursery, which is a London-based improv theater that also offers classes on improvisation. He's also the founder of the Slapdash International, which is the UK's longest-running festival of improvisation. And he's also a member of Maydays, an award-winning improvised comedy and theater company. He's performed and taught the craft of improvisation at festivals across the UK and in countries including the US, Pakistan, Canada, Germany, Ireland, Italy, Portugal, and Finland. Wow.
Mm.
Damn, Jules.
I think that list is a little bit longer now.
I mean, if you feel called to, you can add to it. But
no. That just sounds like boasting at that point.
Anyway, in honor of the kind of the confluence of comedy of improvisation, which we may or may not get into, I have worn this hat, which probably you cannot see. What does it say, Jules? Can you read it?
It says, "It is what it is."
It is what it is, and no one can argue with that.
Nope.
But anyway, I wanted to talk with you, Jules, about improvisation and spirituality.
Right.
But before we get to that, I want to ask my standard stock question, which is, give me some sense of your spiritual/religious background. You can take that anywhere you want.
Well, I was brought up a Christian. I come from a small village about an hour and a half to the southeast of London on a train. So I started as a child. I was taken along, and I used those words specifically, to the church in the village. And then my mother moved to a different church, which was a couple of villages away and was a little bit less traditional. It was what you might call guitars and tambourines kind of place. I was originally in another small church a couple of villages over, and then some of the people who ran that church split off and started meeting in a village hall outside of the official confines of the Church of England, or the official confines is the wrong word, the official remit of the Church of England. And I think as a teenager,
they escaped the confines.
Yeah, they escaped the confines of authoritative religion. And as a teenager, I had the very common thoughts around the Christian God and how can God be good and let these things happen, and all those kind of standard interrogations. And I wouldn't consider myself Christian anymore. As we attempted to record this podcast before, but there were technological issues. So as I said when we recorded it then, I see my understanding of spirituality now is not in terms of necessarily anything supernatural or outside the physical reality that we live in, but is in terms of the transcendent feeling and quality that you can get from cooperation and community with people immediately, and normally immediately in a physical space. So for me, that's where I find spirituality. I don't. I often say that for me, improvisation is like a meditation. It's about presence. It's about immediacy. It's about connection with yourself and with what's happening, which is why your hat is bang on target for me. We can not worry talking about improvisation spirituality. Just put a picture of your hat online, and that's to me as profound as anything that we're going to say today. So that's where I locate my spirituality. Not entirely in improvisation, but in that feeling of being. I think there's an Aristotle thing about the 3 levels of happiness, and the highest level of happiness is to have your talents used at the service of something which you believe to be greater than yourself. And I find that a very, very rich and lovely quote. I found it originally in Csikszentmihalyi's book on flow. I'm sure I'm pronouncing his name wrong. I apologize for that. So that's my spiritual background or thing. What about yourself? Wow,
he's turning the tables on the interviewer here.
Well, I realized that we never had that. We sort of jumped past a lot of the when we met at the conference. We jumped past a lot of the who are you, how you doing questions, and jumped into some profound stuff very quickly. So I never asked that.
Well, I'm delighted that you asked, and I'm going to shorten it greatly. Like yourself, maybe not like yourself. I didn't grow up into any kind of religious tradition. And as you know, we should separate it out, the difference between religion and spirituality. And I'm talking about religion. But my parents wanted me to go to a better school. In the United States, the cheapest way to do that was to go to Catholic school.
Right.
In those days, you had to pay just a little bit of money, and you had to be a Catholic. So that meant that I went through the whole conversion process, which stuck for about a year, I think, And then, like a lot of people in the 60s and 70s, which is where I sort of came of age, I started looking at other different aspects of spirituality, or other different aspects, I should say, of religious practice, Buddhist meditations and things like that. And now I guess I will call myself a spiritual nomad, So questions about what it means, how does one practice it, these are things I kind of make up. And, I kind of settle into a kind of a pattern. I guess I have it. That's kind of a very, very short answer to your question.
And I think, the connection point that I draw out of that very immediately is a Catholic or Christian religious background is very authoritative, is very top down. This is the way in which you practice. This is the way in which you have your connection with God and with others.
This is what you're supposed to believe.
Yeah, exactly. Believe this, or you're wrong, or you're a heretic, or a heretic. Sorry, I mean that's a slightly archaic word, but and I think the idea of constant investigation, and the investigation being in and itself a spiritual activity and path, is certainly something which I really, really connect to on that. Because at the point where you feel like you've found all the answers, you're just not answering the right questions anymore. It's like the hill, you reach the top of the hill, there's another hill, and there's another hill, and there's another hill, and there's never a point we actually reach the summit, because then what are you going to do? Just die. Constant investigation is the key for me.
Well, the thing that I connect with you about in your definition was the aspect of community. So there's this thing where, according to some people, I don't know if this is really fair, but spirituality is just a personal thing.
Right.
It's just a personal perception of it. And there's this collective aspect which really sort of confirms whether it's real or not, I think. So in a lot of religious traditions, they have that. Christians talk about the body of Christ, for example. By that, they mean the community of believers. And Buddhists refer to the word Sangha. I'm probably mispronouncing it, Sangha, which essentially is a community of believers. It's pretty much the same concept. And I guess implicit in that is that you sort of need community to grow, to expand.
Right. And it's in the kind of Protestant tradition, there is both great freedom and great danger in the original idea being you can have a direct connection to God. You don't need to be mediated through the church. You don't need to be mediated through a guy wearing very expensive clothing at the same time as many people are starving and dying of disease. It's wonderful to have the idea that you can personally transcend without needing that, but it also can lead to that kind of Western individualist selfishness, which is not ultimately a very easy way to be satisfied or happy, I think.
Yeah, maybe it's possible, but it's hard, you know?
Yeah, right. Absolutely. There's a lovely, this is used in teaching the paradox of choice. There's a lovely story about jeans, which I come back to over and over again, that 30, 40 years ago, you go, when I was growing up, 30 or so years ago, you want a pair of jeans, you go to the jeans shop and you say, what size is your waist? And then you get the size of your waist and you put it on. And because everyone's different shapes, the jeans don't fit. But that's someone else's fault because the factory didn't make jeans the shape of your body. And now you go to the shop and you go, you want boot cut, skinny, super skinny, like high-waisted, all these different variations. You choose a pair of jeans and they don't fit because everyone's different shapes. But now it's your fault. And I think that, to me, I'm sorry to say this to an American, but I have a lot of issues with the word freedom at the moment because I think it sounds great, but often can lead to a space of anomie and drifting and not having to constantly interrogate the question of what is it that I want, and that actually being quite a terrifying and difficult question to ask. It's much easier to say what is already there, as your hat says, and engage with that. I find that a much easier path to happiness and connection.
I wanted to sort of get in a little bit about your background with improvisation, but I think I want to ask the question a different way. What is it about Jules? Wait, you haven't heard the question now. So there's this thing called improvisation, which you do. Mm-hmm. How does it fit your personality?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So by nature and by upbringing, I was a bookish kid. I was a solitary kid. I found school up to a certain point. I found school very easy. So that image of myself as someone, initially I thought that I wanted to be an academic and was drawn to the romance of the idea of sitting in a library and thinking great thoughts and studying the great ideas of history and all that kind of stuff. And while I am still pretty bookish, the thing that I found was that I can't be that long by myself. And while I do have some degrees of social anxiety, and I find large groups of people challenging, I also find those situations absolutely necessary. So when I was at drama school, when I first did improvisation, I was familiar with it from the TV and from a couple of theatre shows. But when I first did it, I found it absolutely terrifying, panic attack inducing, horrible sort of cold sweats, heart rate going up to, I don't know what a high heart rate is, but hundreds and hundreds. So for me, the interest in improvisation was, this is not my self-image, this is not how I normally am, this is not my easiest way of interacting with the world, but it is incredibly satisfying. And part of the lovely thing about improvisation is, whatever your character is, there's a sense of the constant conquering of the self, the constant transcending of the self, the constant defeating of the demons inside your own heart and mind. So for me, improv is the opposite of everything that I should have done with my brain or expected to do with my brain. And now, even though I spend all of my life doing it, it's still something where I wake up and think, this is not what anyone who knew 15-year-old Jules would have expected. No. So it's something around maybe the idea of like the mask and the shadow, that improv sits in the shadow place, and there's a lot of power in the shadow place.
So last time we attempted to do this, I think
it was very successful in all but the technology, I think.
Oh, you're kind. I didn't feel that way. Anyway, I told myself I wasn't going to prepare, but this time I'm deviating from that a little bit.
Okay.
And what I want to do is I want to take apart this word spirituality, and take and actually apply that to improv and see sort of where it fits. And before that, I want to lead with this quote that I found by E.B. White, the famous humorist. He says, "Analyzing humor is like dissecting a frog. Few people are interested, and the frog dies of it."
Yep.
Nonetheless, we're going to try. Sometimes it's useful to know what you're talking about before you start.
And it's important to say that, it's a great line. It's a very, very, and it's a true line. But you don't get to understand frogs you don't understand frogs entirely by not having some die along the way. So some frogs are going to die in order for us to understand how frogs' muscles work, and pour those frogs and pour those jokes. But sometimes it's necessary to dissect.
So there's this guy whom I don't know named Ted DeMassans. I think that's how you pronounce it. And he's an improviser based in the U.S., I believe. Mm-hmm. And one of the things he did with one of his colleagues is he brought a bunch of people together that were improvisers, and he asked them to look at this connection between spirituality and diversity, or spirituality and improvisation, sorry. And the way that he started doing this was that he tried to get a consensus as to what spirituality meant. So he had maybe 7 different characteristics. And what I'm going to do is to read them one at a time. And maybe you can tell me if you see a contact point with improvisation.
Right. I'm going to write these down so that I have them in my memory. All
right. So so I'll do them one at a time. One is a whole person, which is that in spirituality, there's a sense of attempting to include your whole self, which is the chosen and the giving, the presentable and the shameful, which doesn't sound like a great explanation, but anyway, that was part of it. Mm-hmm. I'll just read them, and then we can go back. We can go back them, or you can just talk. You can just sort of riff off the whole thing. And the other is practice. So just as you practice your craft of improvisation, most people that are, I guess, seriously about the spiritual path, they have something that they do on a regular basis, which helps them ground it or help them get a sense of the transcendent or whatever it is that they're looking to achieve. And the next is awakening, which is the experience from the trance of separation. I love that phrase, the trance of separation. Consciously choosing to bring which is laid dormant to life. And the next was feeling, which is a subjective experience that includes thoughts, emotions, body, heart, and mind. Then there was expressing, giving voice to joy, despair, wonder, curiosity, and whatever else one finds inside. And this is one that we've talked about, which is connection, recognizing that our lives intertwine with our world and many others of it. And another one is larger mystery, which I guess is a little bit, it's a little bit obvious what it means, but we can incorporate the words that you used, which is shadow, the other side of the other aspect of who we are. And the other piece is like deeper meaning. So those are all the components that him and his colleagues came up with that are components of spirituality.
Right. And I think, looking at that list, there is nothing which, if you told me this was a list of things which someone had connected with the idea of improvisation, I wouldn't have clocked anything as being strange. It feels like it's a perfect description of how improv works as well, because one of the aspects of living in a very specialized and capitalist, I'm not anti-capitalist. It's done some amazing things to the world. It's the reason why we can speak from thousands of miles away. But one of the things that comes from living in a world which is structured as it is now is that we tend to have incredibly specialized particular things which we do with our lives. No one's a generalist anymore, or no one in the society that I live in is a generalist. So that idea of bringing the whole person, awakening those parts of yourself which you're not generally using through practice, is an incredibly powerful part of improvisation for me. There's lots of people who will arrive at improvisation classes saying, I'm not a performer, I'm not funny, I can't do emotion, I'm not a storyteller. And we all have all of those possibilities inside ourselves. And of course, some people are better at some things than others. What you do regularly, you get better at if you're doing it right. But the idea of saying, okay, so you think of yourself as being incredibly logical and rational. How about you just be emotional for this evening? It's really powerful. It's really liberating in terms of the satisfaction of the process, and it's also very powerful to have the ability to choose where you sit on a scale, rather than always be stuck in the same place. So all of that's this is kind of the first three. Feeling, expressing, and connection to me are three aspects of the same thing. In order to feel, you must be connected, and if you are connected and feeling, it would feel strange if you didn't express. This idea that we, it's a very British idea, but has some place in American culture as well. And my knowledge of it, I have many great American friends, and I've been there a few times. But it's 300 million people. I'm going to be careful of generalizations. The idea of holding back your emotions, not expressing them, not expressing parts of yourself which are present, is, I don't think very many people would disagree with you, not a good idea. Of course, there are negative things, or of course, there are times when you want to make the smarter choice, not the most pleasurable choice. But those three things are all aspects of each other. And in terms of larger mystery, to me, I would be hard pressed to believe in something magical which sits outside human experience. To me, like, the word supernatural is
an oxymoron. How can it be supernatural?
Exactly. If it's supernatural, if there's something which falls outside the rules of science or physics or chemistry as we understand it, that's because our rules aren't good enough yet.
Right.
I very much doubt that we're going to discover that there are ghosts sometime. But if we suddenly discover that ghosts are a real thing, that'll be because our description of the physical world is not good enough. And one of the things, I read a huge amount of pop science after graduating university. I did an English degree. And I read a bunch of pop science because I was desperate to have something where there was a definite answer. You do an English degree and it's like, well, you could say this. On the other hand, you could say this. On the other hand, you could approach the same work or body of work from a completely different question. And I was enraged by this. And by the end, it's like, someone give me a definite answer. So I started reading a bunch of pop science and sort of hard sciences, physics, chemistry, stuff where you feel like there's going to be an experiment and an answer. And I was amazed by how much of the stuff that I read was, well, we know this tiny little thing, and then there's a huge amount of stuff which we just don't know, or we don't expect we ever will be able to know. And so I think that sense of larger mystery is kind of all tied up with that idea. And then deeper meaning was the bonus one, because you said 7, we had 8, or is deeper meaning and larger mystery connected to each other?
It seems like they're connected.
It does seem like they're connected. To me, I'd locate that larger mystery, deeper meaning thing, not in the supernatural, not in anything which is outside, but in a sense of connection and community with other humans. We're very proud of our big brains, but as a species, we didn't conquer the world because we can think really well. We conquered the world because we can use that thinking to cooperate. A lone nut who lives in the woods is a lone nut who lives in the woods. It is hard to human progress, human ideas, human civilization has been built on each little person doing their little bit. And then sometimes one person who put the final kind of cherry on one particular idea cake gets a lot of credit for it. But nearly no discoveries that I've ever read about were made by one wonderful person who did everything from scratch. It's all standing on the shoulders of giants, to use the Einstein phrase, isn't it? So to me, this is a great description of spirituality, which I will definitely take away and use in this context. But it's sort of a description of a healthy human,
sort of being fully human.
Right, exactly. Which I guess is what, to me, spirituality would mean, because I don't place that supernatural umbrella above it.
Yeah, I like you were talking about at one point as an academic English major, you were trying to find the answers to something, and that was kind of like that was the paradigm. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to find the definitive answer for something, and that is one of the more interesting traps that I myself have experienced. In my spiritual quest, I was at a place where I was just looking for it. I came into a kind of I guess I call it rational way of looking at spirituality, and then I had an opportunity to live in a Japanese dojo.
Oh wow!
And before that, prior to that, it was like in the tradition I was in, it was all these sort of diagrams that kind of explained what yin was, what yang was, and how it all fits with relationship to diet and to life or whatever. And when I got to Japan and living in the dojo, I realized that the people that were they were involved in this tradition, they didn't do that.
Right.
In fact, they were not sort of cognitive or right-brained at all in a certain sense, in terms of what they considered a sort of search for truth or whatever, or meaning.
Yeah, that's an academic external description of the thing rather than the experience of the thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think to me that's sort of the same. It's not sort of the same. I used to do a lot of martial arts when I was younger. I did a lot of karate and jiu-jitsu and kabuto, and so I really connect with that idea of you can't understand the thing by looking at the thing. You have to be doing the thing.
Yes.
And you have to suspend parts of your brain which instinctively in the Western Protestant materialist tradition we think are the correct way to understand things. So in Greek, I'm going to pronounce this wrong as well. There's the word knowledge separates into two branches. This is my understanding of it, and hopefully one of your listeners will correct me if I've got this hideously wrong. There's techne and episteme, and one is the understanding of how something works from the outside, and one is the lived experience of being able to do it from the inside. So I'm a big rugby fan. I love a game of rugby. One of my favorite things to do is watch rugby and tell them all the things they're getting wrong. But you put me on that pitch and ask me to do that. I can't do it. I can just talk about it. And it's interesting now. I'm thinking about that with sportsmen or sports people, to avoid the gender there. You go through the ability to do to the ability to reflect. You know, you play, and then later you become a coach or a teacher
you think
because
about
you've done. Because you have done. I don't think anyone would take anyone seriously who hadn't done the thing as a coach. If I'd say, hey, I'm a rugby coach, I watched a lot of rugby, I can tell you how that works. No one's going to listen to me in the slightest, and nor should they. But in the Western sort of academic tradition, you're allowed to come from the other side. Yeah. You're allowed to say, I teach. What's a good example? You're allowed to say, I teach architecture, for example, having never actually been an architect, and it's a weird way to approach it. I may be wrong at architecture. I don't know about that, but the old joke about those who can't teach is, problematic and typical to certainly how things are done here.
So for me, one of the logical connection points, or most obvious connection points between spirituality and improvisation is around mindfulness. Mm-hmm. Stilling the mind or something. And in terms of the predominant practices that most Westerners use to achieve that, it has to do with something which is passive, like meditation or prayer, even that matter. I was privileged at an early age to understand there's another way of going about that. So I believe I've told you. So in the I guess it would be the Japanese or Chinese tradition, there's kind of active meditation, which is something you're familiar with, mm-hmm. Where you, instead of having like something where you become calm in the beginning, you basically freak out to begin to kind of be very loose with my language here, and then a kind of sort of calm comes. It's quite a different approach in a way, and there's something which is a little bit pernicious and maybe connects with this idea about isolation and passivity, that I guess it's useful, especially when in a world where things are just going all the time, lots of different distractions, but at the same time, it's something that's not complete about it in my mind.
Yeah, it's and I think that the current image of meditation, you ask someone, I reckon if you asked 1,000 people to draw a person meditating, they're going to draw someone cross-legged wearing a robe, maybe a third eye.
Yeah.
They're going to go for that very passive tradition. And I think part of that comes again from Protestant ideology around work and suffering, that work should be suffering. And again, that's literally in Martin Luther's thesis that he nailed to the door of the church, is that God has decreed, or I think even Christ has decreed, that man shall be in suffering for the rest of his life. And it's like, you'll earn your bread by the sweat of your brow and all that kind of stuff. So we have that image of work as being the thing when stuff is really accomplished, and it's definitely going to be unpleasant. So given that so many people have that image of how work is, and I'm not saying that I love every part of running a theatre, I got to make spreadsheets as well, and I'd love those to go away. But the idea that work is doing and is important, and therefore what you do outside of work is going to be something which is not doing, which is to do with absence and reception. And you think of, you ask someone, what does relaxing mean? Most of the time they're going to say something like, oh, sitting on the beach, oh, watching TV, oh, just chilling with my friends. And a lot of that is about the absence of an activity, or the reception of information, the reception of an experience, rather than being an active part of an experience. And while, I've recently discovered that I love saunas. And while I will happily sit in a sauna and do nothing, at a certain point, that ideal of doing nothing as being satisfaction and happiness, it's going to run out. You're going to end up feeling like your talents are not being used, like you're not active, like you're not contributing and interacting with the world. You're just trying to disappear from the world. And I don't think that's an accurate understanding of Buddhist or Eastern meditational practice. I think that is those ideas seen through this Protestant filter of work equals suffering equals real. I think that's what it is, but I don't want to speak for an ancient tradition which millions of people live in the.
And it has lots of different variants and interpretations.
Absolutely,
or whatever. But I think the general sort of frozen stereotype that you use is quite accurate for a lot of people. Another thing that kind of implied on that, and I'm going to read this because, as I already told you, these people, these improvisers, they were attempting to come to terms of what we're trying to come with in terms of this combination. So let's stand on the shoulders of giants a little bit.
Let's do it.
So you were talking about work, for example, and how most people experience work, or what work seems to be in the language that we use. The other side of that is play.
Right.
And I'm going to read something for you because they were talking about characteristics of improv and how the two things connect. And I'll read this. This is about divine play. Many Hindus say the universe itself came into being through Leela, the divine's creative play. Any improv troupe or scene ideally carries a bit of that Leela as well. Even when taking it on a poignant or sensitive topic, there's a buoyant sense of exploring the unknown. We go down paths we've never seen. We create obstacles for the fun of it. We get our heroes into trouble so that they get the thrill of getting out of it. Good improvisation brings more joy, more vitality, more connection with others, and more intimacy. A healthy spiritual life engenders the same.
That's lovely. That's really
that's well
beautifully
said,
expressed. And I think that very, very much connects with what I was saying about work, because the flip side of work, play, and relaxation, we tend to see play as being light, irrelevant, stupid, dumb, silly, all these kind of things. And there's the opposite of serious is not silly. The opposite of the opposite of silly is not serious. The opposite of silly is dead, is leaden, is uninspired, unmoved, unconnected. And I think that something we often say teaching at the nursery is we're never serious and we're never joking. Solve that problem for yourself. It's not, it's like I treat that idea as something a little bit like a koan or koan. I'm not sure how to pronounce it.
Koan, right.
Koan. That how can you be both fully serious and fully joking at the same time? By being alive, by being with this, by following exactly what's written on your hat. It is what it is. There's a wonderful improv performer and director, theatre director who had an improv background in London called Phelan McDermott, who is, I don't use the word lightly, he's a straight up genius. And one of the things that he said, which really struck me kind of early in my improv journey, was you can argue with reality as much as you like, you'll always lose. Which I think is absolutely beautiful, because that to me gets to the heart of that idea of combining being very serious about being very silly and very silly about being very serious. It's just about vitality and immediacy, and something about deadness or leadenness, to describe that quality, goes into the past or goes into the future and says, well, we have to do this now in order to get to that place in the future, or we have to do this now because we made the decision in the past. And of course, you've got to have your pension, and you've got to decide not to take up heroin because it's bad for your body. Of course, you have a sense of the past and you have a sense of the future, but again, in the Western Protestant capitalist model, we tend to spend our whole time going on the past and living in the future, and the sense of immediate presence, which to me is where spirituality lives, just gets squeezed out. You're so busy. It's possible to be so busy organizing your life that there's never any space for the life to actually happen in the middle. Talking in very abstract terms, but
no, that's right. That's just that. I mean, that's where it is. It's interesting. I mean, one other thing I wanted to just explore with this, because we could talk about this for a while, is this notion of the shadow. Because, most, when people talk about spirituality, they usually mean something light and pleasant and happy. And that's all there is. So that when some sort of difficulty comes up or something like that, it's difficult to integrate that perhaps into that sort of paradigm, what being spiritual or being on the journey means. I'll read you something else. I'll just have you reflect and respond to it. These people are talking about the shadows from the same group. Psychologist Carl Jung suggested that integration in the shadow, the hidden, disowned parts of ourself, might prove the greatest challenge of an individual's spiritual life. If left in the darkness of repression or denial, the shadow can leak out in dangerous ways, either through projection or return hostile to those who demonstrate the parts of ourselves that we'd rather deny, or through more immediate destructive rapture, like when a public figure loses his position, getting caught in the act he's decried for years. As the poet Robert Bly has written, every part of our personality that we do not love will become hostile to us. If we're integrated and brought to light, however, shadow can bring greater power, depth, confidence, and even peace. It restores wholeness. So, I guess two-part question: how does one come in contact with the shadow through improvisation? And I guess the second was just a larger question: how do you? What's your reflection on what I had to which I just shared?
To answer the second question first, I don't have a lot to add to that. It's beautifully put. In terms of the how question rather than the what question, we tend to have a strong image of how we are emotionally, psychologically, intellectually. What kind of person are you? I'm decisive. I'm whatever words you use to describe yourself. And while those images of yourself may be something which would be statistically true if you were to place yourself in some kind of scientific test. That doesn't mean that you have to be. If you are someone who considers himself to be super decisive, and then you're faced with a decision which you can't decide on immediately, that can cause a crisis of your kind of wholeness of self. Why am I not? I'm the decisive person. Why am I not? How am I not? This is not how I'm meant to be. How do I? And so you get a kind of fragility of self-image. And because what you're doing in improvisation is constantly playing other characters, other aspects, other bits of humanity, other emotions that you don't normally explore, you get very, very comfortable moving to a lot of different places on any given scale. And by having gone there, you're not scared of interacting with those feelings, attitudes, parts of yourself when you experience them. I'm going to put quote marks around this, in real life.
IRL, right?
Yeah, IRL, exactly. So I think that's the way in which the exploration can happen, because you're liberated by the distance of art. I'm playing a character. I'm playing a character who has a hell of a temper. That enables me to stop being scared of that bit of myself. And that's what, Jung was talking about with integration. There's another lovely Jung quote about the mature, I'm going to get this wrong. It's something like the mature part of, the mature personality is that which embraces both ends of every spectrum. And I find that a very rich and lovely way of approaching this. It's a sort of not summary, but definitely strongly connected to the Jung quotes that they were, or the Jung ideas that they were mentioning there. So to me, that's the opportunity. It's the opportunity to, within the self, play with that which is more than the self. And then when it returns, it's not a big deal. You went through the journey through the underworld and came back with gold.
All right, last quote. I can't resist. We're doing so well with this. I can't. I was going to just leave this one out, but the final one, which is related to all the other ones, which is paradox. So I'll just read this. For many, walking the spiritual path means coming to terms with the paradoxical nature of ultimate mystery. How can life serve up such stunning beauty and such repulsive ugliness? How can we be a democracy and have Donald Trump? Sorry, I just had to put that in there. What loving God will allow such suffering? How can we be such a small part of the universe and yet sense an infinite inherent worth in each life? The deeper one looks, the more mystery one finds. And he writes, improvisation offers a chance to marinate in the richness of such seeming contradictions. How do we pursue excellence and allow ourselves to be average? Make bold offers or defer to our partners? That's a hard one. Stay present to the evolving moment or remain mindful to the overall arc of the show or narrative thread. Invest with intention or choose to change, control or contribute. The correct answer is both of these questions, each of these questions, yes and.
Yeah.
So speak to how improvisation helps us to come in terms with paradox.
All of the paradoxes described in that quote, it sort of feels like coming back to that Phelan message: if you can argue with reality as much as you like, you'll always lose. When you say, how can God be just and merciful and loving and also allow all these things to happen in the world? It's like, well, it's the how is sort of less important than the fact that that's how it is.
That's what it is, right?
Yeah,
you just,
yep. Exactly. I was just say it's all about your hat. You can, when you start to ask those how questions, and of course it's important to engage with ways in which to improve your own situation and the situation in the world. And we've avoided Mr. Trump so far. Let's keep him well out of this conversation because he doesn't get to go in something around spirituality. Again, we tend to conceptualize an understanding of the world in binary, black and white, true and false, real and unreal, morally right and morally not right. And those things, they mostly don't exist in nature. They're human constructed ideas, which are useful ways to navigate the world. But as soon as the world prevents you from, how do I phrase this? You've got the way that you used to, you've got the language and the ideas used to describe the world, and you've got the world itself. You've got to prioritize the world itself. And if the language and ideas used to describe the world are incomplete, then they're just incomplete and not doing the job yet. Because the idea for me to pull out the improv example from that quote, how can you keep an eye on the larger arc of the show while still being present in the moment? Because the larger arc of the show should always serve the moment, and the moment should always serve the larger arc of the show. If I'm feeling like I have to jump through hoops in order to make this show work, then I'm quitting that show, because that's not an improv show anymore. That's a circus trick. But if I have the sense of knowing how the rhythm of a scene, the emotion of a scene, the events of a scene can serve a larger purpose, but also how those larger purposes can serve and inspire the scenes which I'm creating, so that the arrows are going in both directions, then I'm gonna be good at improv. But if I decide to prioritize one over the other, it's going to be either a shit show or a shit scene. Excuse my language. So yeah, I feel like those questions, while I understand the impulse to ask those questions, it just always, it just comes back to your hat, doesn't it? Yeah. It's what it is. Like I said, just put a picture of the hat online. There it is. And that's the thing. There it is.
So final question, Jules. So a little bit put you on the spot, but maybe not unduly. You and I, as you know, and another person, we're actually talking about doing an event around spirituality and improv.
Yeah.
What would you hope people to get out of such an event?
To me, the happiest and most satisfying moments that I have in my life are when there is that feeling of transcending the individual ego self, the bounds of the skull, the bounds of the skin, however you want to describe it, and doing something which is an activity shared with other people, which could only happen with that set of other people, and which could only happen with me there. I'm a necessary part of it, but so is everyone else. And to me, that's the wonderful, extraordinary moments of improv are the points where you feel like, I don't know where that came from. It feels like it was a miracle. It feels like it was given by God or comes from the power at the center of the universe. It's not. It's just the extraordinary power of the human brain for my money. But it feels like that. It's that lovely idea. I've forgotten who it's from of miracles never happen, but we should always behave as if they do. So which I really love as an idea. So what I would like people, the experience that I would like people to have for the event that the two of us and Fiona are looking to organize, is of having been so intensely and closely in cooperation with the other people who are there that you sort of forget the self for a moment and then come back out the other side. And I think that's an essential thing. There's a rhythm of self to group. You can't stay wholly, entirely in the group forever. That's psychologically very damaging. But that coming out the other side and feeling like, oh, wow, these people were strangers 2 days ago, and now they're people that I feel like I know the very insides of their brains in a certain way. But I will probably change my opinion on that 7 times in between now and when we run the event. Also, that all sounded very worthy. I want to have a hell of a lot of fun.
There you go.
I want us to laugh until our sides hurt and go, oh my God, did you just say, oh, I love people surprising themselves. It's wonderful to surprise each other, but people surprising themselves is one of my favorite things when I'm teaching.
Jules, this is wonderful. Now, if people wanted to get in touch with you or the Maydays, what would be a good way to go about it?
The Maydays website is themaydays.co.uk.
I'll put that in the show notes.
Great. And I also, as you said, I'm one of the artistic directors. You said I'm the artistic director. I'm one of the 3 artistic directors of the nursery. We're at thenurserytheater.com. We have our theatre in the city in London, as in the financial sector, which I'm looking at right now across the river. So you can find all our classes there. I've just put my own website live, which is julesmunns.com. So any of those places, and in all of those places, you can find out how to email me if anyone wants to harass me, tell me what I'm wrong about, or tell me the book I haven't read, which will finally unite this incoherent ramble that we've been attempting over the last hour or so.
All right, wonderful, my friend. I look forward to our next conversation. And,
me too.
Listeners, if you want to know more about the Diversity and Spirituality Network, the simplest way to get involved is to join our private Facebook group, which is, you look under Facebook, Diversity and Spirituality, you'll find us. Also, on the 3rd Saturday of every month, we have a community online exploration. You can find information about that there on our website, diversityandspirituality.com. And finally, if you want to support the podcast, you love us a lot, please support us on Patreon. Just go to patreon.com, look for diversity and spirituality. Jules, it's wonderful, man.
That's a lot of fun to talk to you. Thank you very much, Andrew. I look forward to seeing you when we get this event going.
Absolutely, brother. Take care.
Take care, man. Bye.
What is diversity? What is diversity? What is diversity? What is diversity? What is spirituality?